right, so welcome everybody. My name is Max Smith. I'm the Communications Director of 501c Services. As many of you already know, we are a 100% employee-owned company that provides alternatives to state-run unemployment insurance programs. We work with 1,500 nonprofits nationwide through our administration of the 501c Agencies Trust. Also, our product called UInsure, which is a first dollar unemployment insurance program. And we also work with the Boy Scouts. And we have a program called HR Services, which is an HR consulting program. It's a subscription. It's $100 a month. And we work with almost 2,000 organizations through that program. Lots of Boys and Girls Clubs, lots of YMCAs. And they call us when they have HR questions, and we answer them for them and help them find forms and keep up to date on the changing employment law landscape. And like I said, a lot of you all on today's webcast already work with us, and we thank you very much for doing so. Go through a little bit of housekeeping before I hand it over to Ben. If you have questions, go ahead and submit those as we go. Ben will stop periodically to kind of clear the question bank, and then we'll have a section at the end of the hour for any questions he doesn't get to cover. So what we're going to try to do is, for instance, if Ben is talking about puppies, we'll try to clear all the puppy questions before we move on to kittens. And then at the end, we'll figure out any random questions that might have come in. Many of you, the materials, as we said earlier, they're in the handout section of the GoToWebinar platform. You can go ahead and download those now. They'll also be emailed to you later today with our post-event email. They're for the recertification credits. Many of you are HR professionals on this call who are looking for an hour of credit. You know the drill. Once the program is over, a poll will pop up. Complete the poll. Tell me what credit you need, and I will shoot those out to you hopefully by the end of the day. I should be able to do it by the end of the day. Also, if you have to jet for a meeting or go to lunch, you also get access to that poll in that post-event email that also contains the slides. So 2 ways to do the poll. Future webcasts. I have one more webinar this year, which is on benefits in the nonprofit sector. They're going to cover everything that they can see in the future, costs, changes, things that are popular amongst staff, anything and everything they're going to go over for an hour. That'll be November 13th at the same time and same place right here at 12 noon. So we're looking forward to that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Ben. Ben and I, as you can tell, have worked together in the past. He's currently president and owner of Wiser Innovations. I forgot to ask you why it's Wiser, or am I even saying that right?
You are saying it right, and the reason is because that is a family name, and it gives respect and homage to my mother's lineage.
Nice. Okay.
Yes.
Mom. All right, so I'll go ahead and hand this off to Ben. This is a boutique recruiting firm. As you can tell from our earlier discussion, he knows quite a bit about how to hire, and he's going to share some of that insight with you today. So let me hand this off to Ben. And if you have any questions or concerns, chat them to me and shoot us your questions as we go. All right, Ben, go ahead. She's all yours.
All right, thank you so much, Mac. I definitely want to thank you for the platform. I definitely want to thank 501c for doing this. It's a great service. So as everybody knows, today we're going to be talking about the Cheeseburger Test of nonprofit recruiting. And talking about hiring methods for emotional intelligence and cultural fit in the workplace. So as Mac told you, my name is Benjamin Friedman. I am the president. I'm the owner of Wiser Innovations. So as we look at what we're going to cover today, we're going to start just a little bit about my background, about my company, talk about what the Cheeseburger Test is, where it comes from, why it's important, look at emotional intelligence and the importance of emotional intelligence in the workplace, look at a couple of case studies, discuss hiring for emotional intelligence, EQ, and culture, as culture and emotional intelligence do correspond quite a bit. So my background, as Max said, he and I used to work together. I do have a strong nonprofit background. I started my career working in group homes. I moved from there to other more formal education environments and other non-traditional educational environments. After I realized it was time to move on from education, I went back to school. I earned a certificate in human resources from Cornell and realized that what really drove me and what I was really passionate about was building teams and hiring. And so within the field of recruiting, I definitely try to maintain that focus on working with mission-driven organizations, first in the nonprofit sector, but also some in the for-profit sector. As for me, it's just really important that what I'm doing is socially valuable, not just making things convenient, but definitely want to make sure that there's a mission there. And within my career, I've done a fairly good job of doing that, working with different organizations and different for-profits in safety and in the medical space as well. So moving forward, talk about my company briefly. So Wiser Innovation is an outsourced recruiting firm. So basically within the recruiting space, there's staffing agencies which focus on temporary employees and one-off direct hires. Then there's another space where it's an outsourced model. And basically with that model, it's looking at an organization such as mine to come in and be a true partner to either take over your recruiting function for you or to build the recruiting function with you and then act as a resource for your organization moving forward. It's the reason we went with the outsourced model, quite honestly, working on one position, that to me is not the focus of recruiting. Recruiting is really about building great teams and having great hires. With the creation of great teams and great hires, you're then able to create great services and great products. And there's no place more evident than that in the nonprofit sector. You have a great team, they're able to put together great services and serve a population of people that absolutely needs the work that you're doing. So what is the cheeseburger test? Why is it important? So I'm somebody, I'm very motivated by gut feelings, and I've used that quite a bit in my recruiting. And I had somebody at a previous employer ask me, how do I do such a good job, with hiring? Because I was the only person doing recruiting, and I hired for every position in the organization, from executive to entry level. And I said to her, I was like, it's the cheeseburger test. And she looked at me, just clueless, like, because she'd never heard of that. And I said, what I think about is I'm the only person that judges everybody that comes in to see if they're going to fit within what our organization is and if they're going to be able to drive the organization forward. And I said, so I think about, would I want to have lunch with them? Because if I wanted to, then it's likely that other people that I've hired would want to also. So when we look at the cheeseburger test, it's, is a candidate the right fit for the team, the culture, above just having the technical capability and aptitude to do the job? And like I said, this is for everybody from that entry-level person to a C-suite. Do I want to spend time with them? And so when we look at it, and as I mentioned, recruiting, it's really providing the architecture and organizational culture structure so that the company, the nonprofit, can grow. That's what it's really about. It's bringing in the people that are going to take the mission forward. And when you look at what great recruiters do and great recruiting teams do, we're the people that have the pulse on the heart of the organization. And we're the people who, as much, if not more than anyone else in the organization, have to be the subject matter expert in the organization's mission, values, and vision. Because we're the ones that are talking to people, and we're the ones that have to make sure the people come into the organization reflect who and what we are and who and what we want to be. So what is emotional intelligence, and how does it impact how we want to hire? So emotional intelligence is the capacity to be aware of, control, and express one's emotions, to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and empathetically. And so it's made up of four key components: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And so when you look at those four different areas, it's, how do I understand my own emotions, feelings, moods, and how do I understand how they impact the people around me? Next, it's the ability to control or redirect that. It could be positive or negative, that emotion that's going to impact somebody. Am I able to suspend judgment? Am I able to think before acting? Am I able to, if I'm feeling a certain way, deal with that in a way that's constructive to the entire team? Next, it's understanding how other people are made up. It's having empathy, and it's being aware of how they're going to react. And finally, it's the capability and the proficiency, the expertise in managing relationships. It's about building networks. It's about finding that commonality, and it's about that long-term interaction. It's not about just saying hello and getting a 5-minute phone call, but it's really about sustained relationships. So why is this important in hiring, or how does it apply? And why, where's the value? So when we look at the Harvard Business Review, they say that people who understand and manage their own emotions make better leaders. And that's something I definitely agree with. They're better at stress management, overcoming obstacles, inspiring others to work towards goals, managing conflict, building stronger teams, being happier at work. And when we look at all those things, that applies to hiring. Our hiring managers, if they're miserable, that's going to come across to candidates. If our hiring managers are transferring the wrong message and they're not representing the organization the way it needs to be, people aren't going to want to come in, and they're not going to want to work with us. And so that's definitely something that we have to take into consideration. So taking that to the next step in hiring, according to Forbes, emotional intelligence is the ultimate soft skill. I think that's 100% accurate. How people deal with people, at the end of the day, that's what we all are. Some of us wear finance hats, some of us wear HR hats, some of us wear marketing hats, some of us wear development hats, but we're all people and we're all wearing hats. So when you take the hats off, at the end of the day, we're people, we're a team, and we all have to focus towards achieving the same missions and the same goals. So emotionally intelligent people can choose how they react. And that's really important, because everyone gets in situations that are frustrating, that are challenging. But it's what you choose to do, if you're capable of choosing to do within those situations. And learning to read and influence others, with the next piece, is also very important, especially from a leadership perspective, but even from an individual contributor perspective, because we need to be working unified. And if you're somebody who cannot adapt and cannot adjust to things, that's definitely problematic. So when we look at the blueprint for managers to build emotional intelligence on their team, first we look for leaders modeling appropriate behavior. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, how can I? Or if I'm doing what I'm not supposed to do, and it's because that's what you do, then it just transcends an organization. We definitely want to be able to help employees separate emotions from personality. We want to ensure that our employees, our team members, our colleagues are feeling valued. And we need to make sure that feedback is routine and fact-based. Next, it's making sure that assertiveness training is available to employees so they know how to address things properly. They know when and where to have conversations and to express what needs to be talked about, so that interaction can be constructive as opposed to destructive. And we definitely need to encourage stress management. I've never had a job that didn't have stress associated with it, but we have to be able to deal with that, and we have to be able to deal with that in a way that allows us to not let it negatively impact our interactions. So let's look at a couple of examples of hiring for culture fit and hiring for emotional intelligence. So as I've mentioned before, my background is working with youth. And so when there's an opportunity for me to work with an organization in the youth services space, for me, that's just a treat, because that's a mission that's just near and dear to the way I came up and something that I've had a lot of passion for. So one of the positions that I had to recruit for was a youth services organization that was looking to add capacity in human resources. And so the challenge was not just finding someone that was technically capable of doing the job, technical qualifications. The challenge was, because of the nature of this organization, we needed someone with a high level of emotional intelligence, because this organization, you're working with kids, and unfortunately, you do hear stories that are very upsetting and can be very upsetting. And so we needed somebody who can deal with that and can thrive in that type of environment. So the way we resolved this, one, we were very aware of what we were looking for and identified that up front. We knew what the challenges were going to be. We were clear in what they were. And when we assessed people for the role, it was very important for us to understand how candidates dealt with stress, what were their triggers, and how they can manage their emotions so that they can remain professional, when a natural human reaction would be to get upset or to become angry. It's totally normal, but you still have to be able to curb that so that you can handle the situations objectively and professionally. So the result, based on a screening process that was very targeted, we were able to hire somebody who had a background in psychology and who was ultimately familiar with the stories that she might encounter. And because this wasn't her first rodeo and she had that awareness, it definitely gave her the capability to handle anything that came her way. And what was great about this hire was the person in the position, was able to use her psychology training with her HR training and her HR career, put them together. And that was personally motivating for her, because it allowed her to use all aspects of her professional capabilities, which was very motivating and allowed her to be successful in the role. So when we look at the interview questions that were leveraged, to determine if this person was the right fit, one of the things that we looked at and we asked the person to share an example of a highly stressful situation they faced professionally. And I do want to throw in that caveat of professionally. People are not always the same at work as they are outside of work. And because we need to assess how they are on the job, it's very important that we keep all the questions focused on how they act at work. And so that's why we put that professionally in there, so that they don't give an example of what they did over the weekend, but they gave an example of what they did on site. How have you handled it? What would you do the same? What would you do differently? What are the lessons learned? And understanding some of the situations you might be faced with, can you speak to why you want to work here? And that question, it speaks to culture, it speaks to motivation, it also speaks to their emotional intelligence and wanting to be in an environment that will challenge them. And there will be some days that are just hard. So knowing that there are situations that may be upsetting, we specifically talk to, how do you manage your own feelings and emotions to remain professional and objective when when you personally could be upset or disturbed by a situation. So those are the different things that we looked at. The next case study, also with an educational nonprofit, they were looking for a director of development. And so in this one, the challenge is we have a very small organization. Culture fit is absolutely crucial. And in this, we really needed to make sure somebody fit within our organization. Now, I want to stress that fit within the organization doesn't mean you look like everybody else. A culture fit is somebody who is going to be able to represent who and what we are, but they're also going to be able to drive it forward and challenge the status quo in a positive, constructive way to get us where we want to be. And that's something that I use when I'm evaluating candidates. That's part of my cheeseburger test. But it's also something in this situation, we know where we are today, but we need somebody who can get us to where we need to be tomorrow. And when we look at the solutions, and I think this is something that everybody can relate to, we need somebody that's scrappy. I mean, when you're in a small organization, with limited resources, we need somebody that really, these words are not in their vocabulary. It's not my job. That doesn't exist. If there's a meeting and I need you to go take out the garbage, that's your job. If there's, people coming in and, it's 5 minutes before the food fell on the floor and I need you to make a run to the grocery, there's no such thing as not my job. We need people that are scrappy, that wear multiple hats, and that thrive in that situation. In these roles, you are responsible, for money coming in. That's what a development role is. It's grants, it's donations, it's partnership development, it's sales. And there's a lot of pressure to be successful because not only do you have to be successful within the organization, but you also have to be successful externally. And that's something that is really another level with roles that have two sets of customers, the internal and external customer. So how did this resolve? Well, fortunately, we were able to find someone and hire somebody who had a background in development for small nonprofit organizations. And because of her experience working in small teams, it gave her the ability to jump in and to be that scrappy person that we needed, to be that person who didn't have the words, "it's not my job," in my vocabulary. And because of this, because of her background, she had the motivation, to drive development in this role, which is crucial because, even though we're working for a mission, we need money to support the work so that we can make that mission happen. So looking at the case study for interview questions, and just to digress for a minute, unfortunately, because of the way that the PowerPoint is set up, I'm not seeing if you are asking questions or not. So I am just going to take them all at the end, simply because it's not popping up on my screen right now. So if you are, I apologize. I'm not ignoring. I'm just not seeing. And so
I can interrupt. Want me to?
If there's something that's worthwhile that we should interrupt for, then definitely do it. I just didn't want anyone to think that I was just moving forward without taking them into consideration.
We do have a couple of them right now, all surrounding the balance of cultural fitness. So if you want to take a question like that right now, we can do that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So yeah, for instance, here's an example. Jennifer has faced a situation where she had to balance cultural fitness with something like religious freedom. Or
Yes.
She had an employee who was gay get hollered at by a manager as an abomination. So you had, the homosexuality balanced with religious protections. And and how can they legally try to weed out people who are not going to be able to work in an environment where they may have to, face things that might go against personal beliefs? How do you do that legally?
Absolutely. Well, everybody has we're working at situations where people have to interact with other people. And one of the questions that you can ask, and this is an example that I'll actually give later on, is how do you deal with people that are challenging? But you can actually modify that question to go, how do you deal with people that have a different belief system than you? And one of the things that we ask, and this is the question that is actually in the deck, is a question around what are your core values? What are your personal drivers? What are the things that are important to you? And, I'll be honest, you can't come out and say, are you a racist? That's not a question that you can ask on an interview. But you can ask, how do you deal with people that have different beliefs than you do, or people that see the world in a different view? How do you interact and engage them so that there's positive and constructive outcomes, as opposed to negative impact and clashing? So it is something that comes up, and sometimes it's on a topic like that. I mean, sometimes it's on something a lot more simple, where it's just, I think we should do a project one way, you think we should do a project another way. If we disagree, what are you going to do? How do you handle disagreements? And how do you handle opinions of people that are different? Or what do you do if a manager tells you to do something that you don't want to do? So it's really structuring the questions so that you are bringing in people that reflect the organization. And that's something that's challenging. It's something that, this is why when we interview, as much as we ask the technical questions, talk to me about, a time where you've done open enrollments, what were the challenges, and, assessing the technical competence and the depth of experience around open enrollment. You also ask those character questions, and then you follow that up with a reference check, and you ask the references. What do they do? How do they interact with people who think differently than they do, or have a different belief system than they do? And keep it general. Keep it about, you don't have to get into those specifics, but, how does this person interact with people that operate differently than they do? And you can start to get a feel. There's somebody that's open. There's somebody that, I've had to coach in different situations. You can definitely start to get a feel for people that way. The other thing, and this is something else that I talk about later in the webinar, is using a panel interview or a group interview, because then you see how they interact with different people. You see who they're comfortable with, who they make eye contact with, who they ignore. And so you can start to get a feel for what their character is, because now they're in a room with different people asking different questions with different priorities and just different looks. So I hope that answers the question. Moving back onto the case study and interview questions, as that is what we are looking at. One of the things that would be appropriate in that situation, but also here, why do you want to represent this organization? Why do you want to work here? What is it about what we do that excites you? And that's a great question to ask people. It also lets you know if they really know who and what you are. As this is a development position, and we do need to make sure that there's technical aptitude and experience, if we combine that with emotional intelligence, if we ask someone to please describe a time when a large fundraising event did not go as planned, what were the issues, how did you overcome them, and what were the results? It's how someone handles pressure, how somebody handles curveballs, how someone wears multiple hats. It assesses all of those different things. The next thing is, how have you handled a situation where you've done everything right and donor decides to give money that would have been critical to the organization to another organization, knowing you have to deliver that message? I've had that happen where I've done absolutely everything right and it still didn't work. And you have to be self-reflective. You have to, sometimes it's not you and it's not your organization. Sometimes when you look back, you have to be able to be objective and go, you know what, this is where I lost it, or this is what I could have done differently. And with that, the follow-up is, what's your recourse? What do you do in that situation? Because if you are counting on that $100,000 from that donor and they're not giving it to you, you still need the $100,000. So what do you do? What do you do in that situation? Where's your resolve? And finally, you know, asking someone to share a situation where they had to relay bad news to a donor. No one ever likes doing this, but if we have a donor who over the last 5 years has given $250,000 to a certain project, and now the organization is pivoting and no longer working on that project, you don't want to lose that donor because they've been good and you've had a great partnership, but now you've got to let them know that their pet project isn't going to be around in another year. So how do you do that? What is your approach, and how do you retain the donor after you're delivering bad news? So hiring for EQ and culture. What is it? How does it impact? How do we hire? So when we assess emotional intelligence, EQ, and culture in an interview, looking at the World Economic Forum, they did a survey and said that emotional intelligence is one of the 10 most important in-demand skills. And it's going to remain that way for a while, at least through 2022. And that's not surprising, looking at some of the other research that's out there. And, when people are identifying it as the most critical soft skill, it doesn't surprise me that employers are looking for it. And in other research, according to RecruiterBox, hiring emotional intelligent people is challenging. And I agree with this, having to do this on a daily basis. When candidates come in for an interview, they're positive, they're putting their best foot forward. But what we need to make sure is when we are past the honeymoon phase, or even to get through the honeymoon phase, is what they're representing on the interview and who they're representing themselves to be, is that accurate? And so the way we can do this is when we put together our hiring process and we put together the strategy for each position and even organizationally as our strategy for how we're going to hire, we have to ask that question, the cheeseburger test question. Would I want to hang out with this person? Are they somebody who is going to support me in the right way, challenge me in the right way? Are they somebody who I would want to go to a conference with? Are they somebody who I would want to go to a donor meeting with or a funding event with? Be realistic about who you need and what those soft skills are, and include that in the job description. You can include in a job description that somebody is going to have to be doing a lot of different things, and this is not a one-size-fits-all role. You definitely want to have that so that people can self-select either in or out as appropriate. As I mentioned before, conducting group interviews, when you have a group interview, and I will say you want to have people that are related to where this person is going to work, so people that are on their own team, but you also want to have people in other teams. If I'm hiring for a marketing role, I do want to have somebody in finance in because they have to work together on budgets. I do want to have somebody in on the administrative side of the organization. You need to see how people work together, especially with small organizations where everyone has to interact. Holding that group interview to see who they look at, like I said, to see who they ignore, who they make eye contact with, who they may talk down to see if maybe this person works for me, but they don't work for the other 3 people in the room. So there's a lot of value in that. And then following that is letting everybody have a consensus afterwards, letting there be a group debrief and getting that feedback, because everybody who's in that room has valuable information on how they assess that candidate and whether or not that candidate is the right person, both technically as well as with regards to soft skills and culturally. Next is asking insightful questions, and we went over a few of those and I have a few more to share. But it's tell me about a problem you faced and how you solved it. Tell me what you didn't like at your last job. What did you like at your last job? Observe how candidates interact outside the interview room. How do they engage with the person at the front desk? Someone comes up to offer them a bottle of water and say, it's going to be about another 5 minutes. Do they catch an attitude? Do they look like they're put off? Are they sitting, texting or whatever on their phone, and when you go to engage them, they almost give you the, no, wait a minute, I need to finish this. And finally, like I said earlier, you have to check references. Ask people that know them how they respond in these situations. And again, it's not a perfect science, and everyone knows that people want, they want to get a job and they're going to put their best foot forward. But these are tools that help to weed out the people that may not be the right people. So, interview questions for emotional intelligence. And here are some more questions that we can be looking at. First is, tell me about a recent failure and what did you learn? Some people say, I haven't failed. Everybody fails at some point or another. Everybody has something that goes awry. We need people that figure out what happened and don't let the same thing happen twice. Tell me about a time when a coworker was angry with you. How did you deal with it? Even in the best circumstances, sometimes people bump heads. And it could be something, like I said earlier, about a project, or it could be something about somebody having biases towards certain types of individuals. How does that get addressed? How does that get dealt with? Describe a time when you were overwhelmed with emotion and did something you later regret. Unfortunately, we do sometimes, get riled up and we act impulsively. And the measure should be not making the mistake, but what do you do about the mistake? And even how severe the mistake is. Next, it's when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, how do you self-soothe? What do you do to calm down? I worked in an organization, we looked out our window and there was a nature trail. And when I was stressed or frustrated, I'd take 10 minutes, I'd go take a little walk, decompress, come back in, be able to go back. You may not have that luxury, so you may have to do something else, but you need to be able to do those things so that you can be productive when it's a time that does challenge you. And the next thing is, what was your best day at work in the last 3 months? What made it that way? Why did you enjoy it so much? With the flip side is, what was the worst day that you had in the last 3 months and why did you dislike it? All of those things give insight to candidates' emotional intelligence and reflect who they are likely to be as a member of your organization.
Ben, before you go on,
Yes.
We have a question that you might be able to address at this point.
Absolutely.
So, how are you able to gauge whether or not people are answering the questions the way they think you want them to answer, or whether they're being, I guess you could say, honest? Is there a way to discern that, to figure out if the candidate's just trying to answer the way he or she thinks you want them to answer?
Well, yeah, not 100%, but yes. One of the things that you can do is ask follow-up questions. Listen to what the candidate is saying. As an interviewer, you always want to be an active listener, and you can always probe them to talk about things in more detail. The other thing you can do, and this is where reference checks are very important, if there is something in the interview that gives you pause, ask their references about it. And if they're giving you references that can't speak to it, ask for a direct manager, direct supervisor. If they're talking about it, what their management style is, and you think they're telling you what you want to hear because you think it fits your organization and it's not sincere, then ask them for a direct report. But if you're having pause, if you don't think that what they're saying is sincere, if you have that gut instinct, again, the cheeseburger test, that gut instinct, if you're concerned about their integrity on the interview, are they somebody that you want in your organization? And there will be people that, they can do a dynamite job of telling you what you want to hear. But that's where you do your due diligence around it and you do those other things. And sometimes some of those people fall through the cracks. Like I said, recruiting is not a perfect science. There is, unlike other things, if I go buy a television, that television specs are the television specs. They don't change. But with people have the capability to think and to change. And, some people are better at things than others. And, you do want to do all those background things, but you may still have someone come through who's not the right fit. And unfortunately, that's something that has to be remediated later. But if you are doing those things and you are doing your due diligence, you are asking the follow-up questions, it does lessen the possibility for that to happen. So I hope that answers that question. If there's a follow-up, let me know. Otherwise, we'll get some questions to assess if someone is a strong cultural fit. And first, it's describing the work environments in which you're most engaged. It's, like I mentioned earlier, what are some of your values or guiding principles? If we see what somebody values and we know what's important to them, we know whether or not it aligns with us. And this is where, if we want to find out more, ask why. If someone says, it's really important to me that we have camaraderie. Why? Why is that important to you? And probe that a little bit deeper and challenge them and make them explain why these things are at their core. Next, how did the culture at your last company empower or disempower you? That'll give you a lot of insight to what works for them and what doesn't. It'll also show you, if they describe the culture and you've just listened to them describe their values, you can see if there's an alignment. This one is a very interesting question because a lot of people don't think about it. But what would make you quit a job in your first 3 months? Most people don't think about that question because they never go into a job thinking they're going to. But it lets you know where their values are. It lets you know about that alignment, and it lets you know what's important to them and what are the make and break things for them. As we all deal with customers, share a time when you did something to go out of your way to delight a customer. And that could be something like, just sending a text message, happy birthday, showing them that you actually pay attention to the details. Or it could be something big, where you've gone out of the way and really moved heaven and earth so that you can achieve a deliverable for them. And another thing to ask when we're looking at culture is, when have you gone out of your way to help a teammate? And this is also important because if someone is going to talk about they value being part of a group, being part of a team, well, this is the part where they get to show it. How are they a good teammate? And that doesn't matter if they're a leader, if they're a manager, if they're an individual contributor. We all work together. And so that definitely needs to be demonstrated. So to sum this all up, as I've mentioned, recruiting is an imperfect science. As we're dealing with people, and people can change, like I said, people can have differences of opinion. There's no perfect system for getting it right every time. But if we keep focused on what recruiting is and what our goal is, then we have to remember that we're looking to provide the architecture for an organization in terms of culture and growth. And like I said, that doesn't mean you agree with me, but it means that you challenge me, and that when we do disagree, we're doing it in a manner or a function that is constructive. And you're proposing to me, have you thought about this? Or what if you delivered this way as opposed to that way? Or what if we leverage this resource as opposed to that resource? And so you're always looking to build even when you're not aligned. I know we're talking about emotional intelligence, we're talking about culture and how crucial that is to hiring, but it's but don't diminish the technical competence. You can have people on your team that everybody likes, but if they don't pull their weight, they're not the right people. And that's something that we have to be able to combine the two when we are assessing talent. I mean, if I need someone that can set up shows and make sure that our booth is right when we're or set up speaking engagements. Now they may be charming, everyone may like them, they may have the emotional intelligence to work in the organization, but if they don't deliver on those things, then ultimately they're not the right person. And when we do focus on the emotional intelligence of a candidate, we have to focus on how it relates to your organization and what that means, because just because some things are one way in one organization, every organization is different. And just because someone may have been good in an organization similar does not mean that they're good for your company, your organization. And that's something that we do have to take into consideration, because there's no one size fits all. So with that, I want to just share, for your own resources is in there. If you want to look at the articles of where we did our research. I want to thank you again, for taking time. Hopefully one day soon, I can be enjoying a cheeseburger or, lunch of your choice, and continuing this conversation. And so at this point, I definitely want to open it up and see if I can pull those questions out and see if we can address any of them.
We'll just wait to see if any more questions will come through. We've given you most of the ones that have come through already.
Okay, excellent.
Just to remind everybody, the slide deck is in your handout section. You'll also get a copy of it emailed to you later today. And if you need those certification credits when we close this down, the survey will pop up. And I'm not seeing any more questions come in. Seeing a couple of congratulations, good job, well done, appreciate it. But no real questions. So,
well, if there are questions after the fact, my contact information is on the deck. You can also get it from Mac. I'm happy to have conversations if you think of something tomorrow, or you realize you just got a position and you need to recruit for. Definitely reach out. I'm happy to be a resource above and beyond just the past hour.
All right. All righty, Ben. Thank you for your time, and everybody have a great week.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye.